This is your host, Bruce McGuire. Today, we are tackling one of the most controversial topics. Now, why it's controversial, I do not know. If you ask the question, when is it okay to, or when is it legal to kill someone who is assaulting you, it might not be that controversial. If someone is attempting to take your own life, your life, you resist, you defend yourself. And if there is a loss of life, the person assaulting you, then that would be justifiable if you are resisting with whatever force you need in order to preserve your own life. But for whatever reason, as soon as costumed individuals enter the equation, whether they're wearing police costumes or military costumes or any kind of so-called official costumes, all of a sudden, there's controversy. Tough. I'm, of course, your host, Bruce McGuire. If you want to help support the podcast, help logic and reason return to a world where it is quickly going extinct, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. Hit that bell for notifications. You can also become a YouTube member right here on YouTube. Help support the channel that way. Like and share. Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic, logical analysis, co-podcast, or requests. You could also be a guest on the podcast depending on your tier. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. So why is there all of this controversy? If you're a law-abiding citizen and you're just minding your own business, if terrorists bust your door down and attempt to kidnap, assault, or kill you, I mean, obviously, legally and lawfully, those are obviously two different things. Maybe I should have titled this, "When is it lawful to kill a cop?" instead of legal. But if someone is assaulting you, if you're innocent and you've committed no crime, and someone is assaulting, kidnapping, or attempting to murder you, I mean, obviously you have a right to defend yourself. Everybody does. So, yeah, I don't know where the controversy comes from. A lot of bootlicking, authority-worshipping cultist goofs, they hallucinate that if an agent of the state, a mercenary for the state, whether they're wearing a police uniform or any other kind of uniform or costume, somehow, if there's some kind of magical official status, that your only option is to grovel. And if you die, you die. Who cares? Because they're acting in an official capacity. Statism, of course, the deadliest cult in history. The hallucination that humans have the right to rule other humans and violate their will. Steal from them, assault them, basically do whatever scribbles go on in DC or wherever. Somehow those magical scribbles enable the so-called official government agents or government mercenaries to do whatever they want to the mere mortal common man. But is that really true? What's the legal precedent here? What has the Supreme Court ruled? Because either humans have a right to defend themselves or they don't. So again, I really don't see the controversy of such a question, but a lot of goofs out there, a lot of statist goofs, they'll be outraged at the very question being posed. And that really tells you all you need to know. about the cult of statism and the propaganda and the brainwashing that takes place, causing many to bootlick and grovel at anyone in a certain type of costume. Somehow that there's this hallucinated right for these costumed individuals to do whatever they want, and that the only option is to comply, and if you survive, you can sue in court or whatever. Now, obviously, that's not the way it really is, and before all the triggered goofs out there think that I am somehow anti-law enforcement, obviously I'm not. I mean, all the respect in the world to actual legitimate peace officers and public servants who de-escalate situations, who don't violate the rights of peaceful law-abiding citizens. Unfortunately, there is greater than 0% of cops who don't do that. Cops who violate rights at every turn, all day, every day. Unfortunately, that's simply reality. So what we'll be taking a look at is, of course, legal precedent and Supreme Court rulings. So, believe it or not, I'm going to be going to Snopes, one of the most bogus, sham propagandist websites out there. Now, it's actually kind of funny because in their own so-called fact checks, they might say false or mostly false, but when you read it, it's actually the opposite of what it says. The opposite of their claim on this bogus sham website. So there's an article here from April 26, 2018. Do U.S. citizens have the right to resist unlawful arrest? By Dan McGill. And it says here, mostly false. So you don't, no matter what a costumed mercenary does, according to the Snopes headline here, it's mostly false that you have the right to resist unlawful arrest. And this bootlicking propagandist website says here, what's false? Throughout most of the U.S., there is absolutely no right to resist unlawful arrest. Even in the places where the law allows for the possibility of such a right, it is a limited one. So obviously, I mean, this is full-scale goofery from Snopes, one of the most bogus websites out there. Coincidence theorists and bootlicking authority-worshipping cultists love this site, though. But what's curious about this article is it actually gives the court cases showing the opposite is true. So there's a few different interpretations here. Citizens may resist unlawful arrest to the point of taking an arresting officer's life if necessary, from Plummer v. State 136, Indiana 306. But this premise was upheld by the Supreme Court of the U.S. in the case John Bad Elk versus U.S. 177, U.S. 529. The court stated, quote, where the officer is killed in the course of the disorder, which naturally accompanies an attempted arrest that is resisted, the law looks with very different eyes upon the transaction when the officer had the right to make the arrest, from what it does if the officer had no right. What may be murder in the first case might be nothing more than manslaughter in the other, or the facts may show that no offense has been committed. So, Indiana Supreme Court Chief Justin James McCabe supported the right of an individual to forcibly resist an unlawful arrest, writing, quote, when a person being without fault is in a place where he has a right to be and is violently assaulted, he may, without retreating, repel force by force. And if, in the reasonable exercise of his right of self-defense, his assailant is killed, he is justifiable. These principles apply as well to an officer attempting to make an arrest who abuses his authority and transcends the bounds thereof by the use of necessary force and violence, as they do to a private individual who unlawfully uses such force and violence. Now, this should all be common sense. But in the statist cult, it's not common sense, is it? Because all men are created equal. There are no magical rights granted to people wearing costumes. Because you can't, if you have a right to life, person, and property, there's no magic invalidating those rights depending on who's violating. I mean, this is all basic common sense logic 101. But in an age of gopher, I can't believe we actually even have to go over this. I mean, there are bootlicking goofs out there who actually think that you should always comply no matter what. So if costume terrorists are killing you, your family, your children, your dogs, you should just lay down and comply and then try to file a complaint with the court later if you're alive to do so. There are some clueless bootlicking goofs out there that actually recommend this. Just comply. Hundreds of millions have complied, and they're dead, because democide is the leading cause of death in human history. Hundreds of millions complied. They are now dead because they complied with corrupt scum that claim they have the right to rule other humans. I can't believe this is actually controversial, but apparently it is. Kill the bank, welcome. Yeah, I don't know what's going on with the mic today. It sounds a little weird. I'm getting a little bit of an echo, but use your illusions. This sounds interesting. Hello, Heracles. Kingdom of Relics in here. Okay, so yeah, and it's also kind of funny that even authority-worshipping propagandist statist websites like Snopes even cite the exact cases and judge's opinion, yet still say mostly false, because they want most goofs just laying down and bootlicking. And they support John Rowland, whose website constitution.org outlines some of this. Snopes states here, Rowland correctly points out that 7 years later, the U.S. Supreme Court unanimously granted a new trial in the case of a man sentenced to death for killing a police officer while resisting arrest. This ruling was made on the basis that the trial judge had erred in law by telling the jury that the arrested man had no right to resist arrest, regardless of whether there was a legal justification for his arrest. So what kind of a scum is this trial judge that basically states no one has a right to resist any kind of assault or kidnapping, even if they're innocent? I mean, the level of goofery here, the level of goofery and corruption. I mean, that's just blatant treason. How is that trial judge not executed for treason? Not that I would be advocating for that, but that's what the law states. An individual did have the right to resist an arrest, the court ruled, if there was no legal justification for the arrest. In the Plummer case, where Justice McCabe described the act of killing a police officer while resisting an unlawful arrest as justifiable. And then, of course, I mean, there's a few things here where obviously if the party is initiating force, then obviously, you can't use force against others, so that goes both ways. Now, Snopes here says that over the second half of the 20th century, the right to resist unlawful arrest was progressively diluted. Look at the language here used by these corrupt scum at Snopes. Struck down in courtrooms and legislatures across the country, as documented in a 1997 paper by the lawyer and law professor Andrew Wright. In 1969, Alaska Supreme Court Justice Roger Connor wrote, "We feel," I mean, look at the language here by these corrupt scum. As opposed to looking at the letter of the law, they're talking about feelings and emotions. This goes back to 69. I mean, this is where a lot of these woke goofs probably got their ideas, by these Supreme Court justices talking about feelings. Instead of just looking at objective, empirically verifiable definitions. It's crazy. "We feel that the legality of a peaceful arrest should be determined by courts of law and not through a trial by battle in the streets. It is not too much to ask that one believing himself unlawfully arrested should submit to the officer and thereafter seek his legal remedies in court. Such a rule helps to relieve the threat of physical harm to officers who in good faith but mistakenly perform an arrest, as well as to minimize harm to innocent bystanders. We hold that a private citizen may not use force to resist peaceful arrest by one he knows or has good reason to believe is an authorized peace officer performing his duties, regardless of whether the arrest is illegal in the circumstance of the occasion." So a lot of tricky language there. So they're talking about, so here they're also saying basically that the police officer's safety is more important than the private citizen, which is obviously treason and just goes against all common law and just basic human decency, because all men are created equal. Furthermore, it says a private citizen may not use force to resist peaceful arrest. What is a peaceful arrest? So if an officer politely, verbally requests that they come to the station and they decline, what happens then? Can an arrest ever truly be peaceful? Because then if the officer initiates violence, initiates assault, and then attempts to kidnap an innocent civilian, at that point it's no longer peaceful arrest, is it? So it's actually kind of weird, even in the language, that's tricky. So all this really proves here is that corruption is on the rise. There was also a case, I don't know if this was the Bad Elk case, where apparently police officers were beating a subdued unarmed suspect. They were stomping on his skull, and a private citizen intervened on behalf of the private citizen and shot the police officer that was about to kill the private citizen, and he was also found not guilty. Now, this was over 100 years ago, where obviously there was a lot less corruption and people had some kind of basic sense. But yeah, now obviously it would be problematic because obviously a lot of corrupt officers, I mean, they behave like mafias or gangs. They very rarely engage one-on-one. So if a cop sees another cop getting killed, they're going to jump in. They're not going to want to actually do their job and investigate. They're not going to actually do their job and try to uphold the law and see who's at fault. They're going to immediately try to kill an individual killing a police officer, presupposing that their fellow police officer could not have been in the wrong. And then this, of course, only begets more violence and death. because unfortunately, many police officers simply don't even know the law, which is actually kind of crazy when you think about it. Law enforcement officers are going around policing feelings and policies instead of the actual law. I mean, just looking at all these First Amendment audit videos, I mean, they're disgusting. How these costume terrorists go around violating private citizens' rights, violating their oath. I mean, they should all be in prison, any officer that violates an innocent private citizen's rights. And just all of these goofs jumping to the defense and bootlicking corrupt officers. I mean, it's one thing to commend, of course, the officers who uphold their oath and actually follow and uphold the law. Peace officers who do that. Sure, they deserve all the praise in the world. But the ones that don't, I mean, you see all these clueless bootlicking goofs jumping to defend the ones that don't. The ones that are just trespassing people from public property for no reason. I mean, just the level of insanity in some of these audit videos. And if you haven't seen the music video, Rob Hustle, Call the Cops, it's kind of a scary video. It came out 10 years ago now. And it's just basically a montage of cops beating up people in wheelchairs, old ladies, stomping on the skulls of handcuffed, subdued individuals face down in the street, and just levels of depravity you would see from, you know, any criminal gang members or terrorists, same behavior. And one could only wonder if that's what they felt comfortable doing on camera. I mean, what is going on for the past 50 years that wasn't caught on camera? I mean, this is all very disgusting. I mean, it's insane. The statist cult has propagandized police officers just through Hollywood and all of these PR campaigns into getting people to presuppose they're in the right, to presuppose they know the law and enforce it. And it's just a couple of bad apples here and there. It's not an actual big problem. It's bonkers. Kill the Bank says, the police state is real among us. Thing is, these elites have us doing their dirty work for them, and we go right along with it. Just following orders sound familiar to anyone? Shake my head. Heracles says, I just stumbled across an anti-auditor channel a few days ago. The bootlicker was unbearable. And think about the state of society where you have anti-auditors. You have people out there against human rights. So they're openly against the exercise of basic human rights. I mean, these genocidal statist scum just go around bootlicking. It's just insane. And 100% of them are not paid shills. That's what's scary. There are at least a few out there that are just these genuinely clueless bootlicking goofs that want to support authority no matter what. The cult of authority worship. Just these hallucinations that the authorities must be right or must know what they're doing, despite all of history showing the opposite. I mean, it's absolutely bonkers. For those that don't know, Larkin Rose, a very popular anti-statist, had a video many years ago, when is it okay to shoot a cop or kill a cop or something like that. And that inspired this video because back when he posted it, it was incredibly controversial. I mean, the amount of hate in the comments for him asking a question. He wasn't advocating violence in any way, and neither do I. Obviously, I do not advocate violence in any way, but those denying that humans have a right to self-defense, I mean, think about what an anti-human scum you have to be to deny that a human being has the right to live, has the right to not be assaulted, has the right to not be stolen from or kidnapped or have their family killed. I mean, just think about the level of depravity of someone who would actually advocate against human rights actively. I mean, it's just insane. I mean, if you're a king or a ruler or one of these Illuminati string pullers, yeah, sure. But to go against, as a commoner, as a common mere mortal man or woman, to go against your fellow human, to hate your own species of humanity that much, I mean, it's really sad. It's really sad that there's even bootlickers out there. It's kind of a weird thing. It's just so weird. Like, almost any video you see on social media of cops just stomping an unarmed human that's not resisting on the street, or even clubbing them with nightsticks after they're already subdued, regardless of what they did prior, there will always be at least a few scum defending the actions of the officers. I mean, just think about that. It's absolutely insane. I mean, even Snopes articles on this, as if governments or courts are the ones who grant human rights, as if it's some kind of a privilege, as if you don't have the right to your security of person, as if you always have to comply, even if it means the cost of life or limb or your family. I mean, it's just absolutely bonkers. Absolutely bonkers. Any thoughts from the listeners here? User Illusion says, where was this type of anti-human belief get learned? Was it home or government or institution? I mean, it's basically just the cult of authority worship. Coincidence theorists, typically, there's a certain amount of mental weakness where if the authorities know what they're doing, it's kind of a safety blanket for the mentally weak. Because then they don't have to think about, oh, who's right, who's wrong. It's hard. I mean, it also takes, a lot of it is also cowardice, because to just comply is the path of least resistance. I mean, think about what you're putting on the line. I mean, obviously the founding fathers of this entire country, of the U.S., I'm in the U.S., the U.S. was founded by a bunch of cop-killing, tax-evading traitors to the government. Now, I don't know where it gets lost along the way, where a lot of goofs hallucinate that it's a virtue to grovel at the feet of those hallucinating they have the right to oppress you and do whatever they want with you. But yeah, it's pretty much learned in government indoctrination facilities known as schools, where do what you're told, don't ask questions, or you can ask questions, but you can only ask these types of questions. You can only ask inside the box, authority-approved questions. You can't ask questions that actually questioning the authorities themselves. And then from there, it's kind of an uphill battle where, again, this is why I advocate not just logic and reason, but psychology, to examine the very nature of why people hold the beliefs they hold. Kill the Bank says, and those other police just sitting back watching these horrors by these bad apples are just as guilty as the ones doing the beatings, in my opinion. Yeah, I mean, they're party to the crime. I mean, there are actual laws that would prevent you as a citizen, I mean, either Good Samaritan laws or whatever, but notice how there aren't specific laws against cops standing by while innocent, unarmed human beings are beaten to death. Handicapped people, people in wheelchairs, old ladies. I mean, it's just absolutely bonkers. Yes, Heracles, authority worship that is driving a lot of The Matrix. Yeah, I mean, The Matrix is just such a great movie because it parallels so much. Because people that are so brainwashed into this cult of statism, They associate themselves with their masters, controllers, and oppressors. They actually believe that the cops and themselves have the same interests. I mean, one popular saying that's been growing in popularity the last few years, back the blue until it happens to you. Everybody thinks that police officers are so brave and all of this when, I mean, construction workers have a far higher death rate than police officers. It takes far more bravery and risk to be a construction worker than a police officer. I mean, there's plenty of sports that have a much higher death rate than the profession of police officers. I mean, the solution here, obviously, is privatized police. I mean, I think Minneapolis does it already, where instead of stealing and extorting the public, you only pay for police services when you need them. Because anything the government is involved with is obviously going to be the least efficient and least competent. I mean, just look at any industry. I mean, if you want something run into the ground and done as worst as possible, have the government run it. When police are privatized and you actually have a free market, if police don't solve your case, they get fired. They don't have immunity. They don't get protected. They have an incentive to actually get paid and do good. That's why the free market, a lot of these cultist goofs hallucinate that capitalism is what we have now, which we obviously don't. We don't have a free market. We have a corrupt corporatist system where everything it's taxed, licensed, endless bureaucracies and paperwork. I mean, you can't even sell lemonade without trying to get licensed and approved and all this nonsense. It's as far from a free market as possible, which is why the state of the world is what it is, particularly the U.S. Obviously, the U.S. has freedom in certain categories, but in other categories, it's a lot less free. For example, China, on the human rights scale, is much less free than the U.S., but to start a business, it's a lot easier in China. You can look up business freedom indexes, which refers to licensures, taxes, and just bureaucracy and hoops you have to jump through. It's a lot easier to start a business in China than it is in the U.S. And this is just the level of goofery the world has risen to, where, again, these are hasty generalization fallacies and false dichotomies, where people think, oh, if America's the most free country in the world, that must mean it's the most free at everything, which is obviously not true. Same thing with China. Kill the Bank said, if it were just incompetence, the government would accidentally do things that actually help the people. Jim Mars, wow, that's a good one. I haven't heard that in a while. That is a good one. I gotta start using that. Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. A lot of people incorrectly refer to Occam's razor, but they also incorrectly refer to Hanlon's razor. And Hanlon's razor is never mistake for malice what could easily be explained by stupidity. And that's not a bad razor to use in your everyday life, dealing with friends or family, because sometimes they just make dumb choices. They weren't really out to get you. But when it comes to the government, I wouldn't be so quick to use Hanlon's razor, as Kill the Bank just pointed out. I think a lot of people might be intimidated by this topic. We don't have too many people in the chat right now unless they didn't get notifications. It's a huge issue on YouTube, of course. Just like and comment on more videos that should help, but no guarantee. So what's the takeaway here? I mean, obviously, I do not advocate for violence in any way, in any situation. But call me crazy. I actually believe in human rights. I mean, I know. I mean, it might be very mind-shocking in this day and age. I believe human beings have the right to life and limb and property and not have their families assaulted and killed and kidnapped. Call me crazy. Apparently that's getting kind of crazy. Apparently those beliefs are kind of crazy nowadays. I actually got into a little bit of a tiff with JR on the Bill Cooper podcast because he was saying Bill Cooper should have just complied. But without knowing what was going on, if those agents were specifically sent to kill Bill Cooper, and I don't know if his family was there at the time, what choice does a man have other than to defend his family and himself against other humans trying to actively take his life or kidnap him? Now again, I don't know about the charges or what was going on, but just on a basic level, if someone is attempting to harm you and you or your family, all men are created equal. So whether they're wearing a costume or not, whether they say they're from the government or not, because they could be an imposter as well. They might not even be a real police officer. So it's kind of dangerous. I mean, more than 0 people have been killed by police impersonators, by FBI impersonators, by government agent impersonators, more than 0%. So it's really dangerous advice to just say, lay down. If somebody's wearing some kind of official-looking costume, just lay down and pray they don't kill you. Just pray for it. I mean, that's madness. I mean, who thinks that's a good idea? To just comply no matter what? I mean, there are hundreds of millions of people dead because they complied no matter what. So if you believe in human rights, how can you say that that's good or justifiable or even legal, lawful, or moral advice in any way? And for all the Christians in the house, or anti-Christians, there are a lot of atheist groups who are specifically anti-Christian. And they're anti-guns and all of this. Maybe they should crack open the Bible once in a while. I mean, there's some interesting passages in there. For those that are well-versed in the Bible, these will probably not be new, but I have a few that I reference now and again. Luke 22:36, and he that hath no sword, let him sell his garment and buy one. Now, why would it be important to buy a sword? Why would a sword be more important than clothing? Is it because that not just basic human common sense that there are bad people out there? And if you want to defend your life, it's going to be hard to do if you're well dressed with no weapons. Riz says, ooh, nice topic, my wheelhouse, use your illusions, and who knows, if Bill Cooper had just complied, it could have been worse behind bars. Well, judging by the nature of the setup, so from the limited information we have, apparently there was some altercation a few hours or the day before, prior to the alleged officers being sent to his home to so-called apprehend him. It seems like they were setting him up for a shootout. Once someone starts shooting at you, I mean, you have a right to defend yourself. I mean, were they even real officers? I mean, we don't know who they were. A lot of the circumstances of his death are obviously hush-hush, so we don't know anything about that. But apparently there was some kind of setup going on. Like, look at the Ruby Ridge situation. I will be releasing a podcast on that. You have these corrupt scum agents of the government trying to entrap a guy over shotgun length. So you have these traitors who, according to the law of the land, would be executed for treason for violating the Second Amendment, which clearly states shall not be infringed. So for those that don't know the definition of infringement, it's any kind of restriction or modification, such as barrel length on a shotgun. So they try to entrap this guy, and then they trespass. So according to the letter of the law, and they kill his family members, kill his dogs. I mean, he would have been well within his right to shoot any terrorists on his property. And that's why Ruby Ridge is so controversial to some. But when terrorists, whether acting within the bounds of their as mercenaries for the state or not, when they try to kill you, especially if you're innocent, but even if you're not innocent, if you're not the one initiating violence, like let's say you forgot to pay some kind of ticket, which may or may not be legal either, because all humans have a right to travel. If we're going by common law, if there is no injured party, there is no crime. So if you haven't injured anybody, what is the parameters of such an encounter where others are initiating violence against you and you just want to be left alone? Yeah, Ruby Ridge was tragic, and Waco as well. I mean, it's just unconscionable that there are still people who defend the actions of the mercenaries of the state in those situations. I mean, it's absolutely bonkers. You have peaceful people that aren't hurting anybody, and then you have the aggressors. You have literal terrorists initiating violence against peaceful people and even children. I mean, it's not hard to figure out who the bad guys are here. Riz, yeah, I actually mentioned it at the beginning if we're discussing legal or lawful. Legal obviously just refers to scribbles of individuals who hallucinate they have the right to rule others. Lawful refers to the actual law. Something legal can be unlawful. Kill the Bank says, hello Riz, and in my semi-educated opinion on the subject, the police were there to take out Bill. Very possible. We don't know those circumstances. And again, if there is no injured party, there is no crime. I mean, that's common law, which, if we're being lawful, would supersede any law. Common law would supersede the scribbles of the corrupt. It's kind of bonkers how so many people, I mean, if you're a moral human being, whether you're a cop or an FBI agent, I mean, I don't know exactly what the training entails, but from the limited amount I've seen, they not only do not have, they don't need to follow unlawful orders. There's no expectations of them to follow unlawful or illegal orders. In fact, in certain documentation, it actually specifically states that they're obligated to not follow the order and report their superior. Now, obviously, we know that that's not really how it works and that things don't go down that way because of egos and threats, etc. There was recently a female officer who actually tried to restrain a male officer from killing already subdued and handcuffed suspect, and they actually ended up turning on her. He punched her straight in the face, and then I think she resigned, and then they were harassing her and stopping her all the time until she had to move out of the area. But that's the reward that good cops get when they try to stop bad cops. It's like a club within a club. And unfortunately, just judging from the amount of confirmed video evidence, one can only imagine the true amount of human rights violations occurring out there every single day. Riz says, people have forgotten they actually live in the private realm. The public realm was cleverly forced upon us with many ways of creating joinder between the living man and the fiction. Well, I mean, without even going down that rabbit hole, simply following the letter of the law would suffice, simply recognizing basic human rights and terminating any officer who did not. By terminating, I don't mean killing. I mean terminating and holding legally accountable. Because if this was a just country, I mean, the prisons would be filled to the brim with all of these corrupt officers. Instead, most of the time, they're just transferred to other departments, or sometimes they are fired, but they're never prosecuted for their crimes, even if they killed people, including children, as a result of their unlawful actions. But most of the time, nothing happens, no matter how many rights they violate. Sometimes they get transferred, sometimes they get fired. Very rarely is there prison time for corrupt cops. Use Your Illusion says, sadly, many refuse to believe or even look into or understand the private realm versus the fiction or public, aka corporation. Yeah, I mean, that's a deep rabbit hole, but even on surface level of basic human rights, a lot of people don't even want to look at that. They're too busy bootlicking. The living man versus straw man could be an entire podcast series, but yeah, I mean, I just don't get it, because even on surface level, even just basic Bill of Rights, I mean, it's kind of crazy how many people don't even support that. I mean, some would even argue, just in allegiance with the human species, every human has an obligation to fight for their own survival. Because not only is it for your benefit, I mean, it's your life, you have a right to live, everybody has a right to live. But also just laying down and bootlicking and dying just because of the cult of authority worship, I mean, that's being a traitor to your own human species. Because, I mean, it's just, is there a worse act than that? To just lay down. It's crazy. I mean, this was always going to be a short podcast, so, I mean, we'll round it out here. I mean, Riz, if you want to go over any other points here. But for those who are still doubting that there's a lot of shady business going on there, check out the Rob Hustle video, Call the Cops. And then you can only imagine what hasn't been caught on video. Mr. One-to-One, how's it going? I have no idea what's going on with the mic. It's weird. Couldn't figure it out. I just wanted to get this podcast done. Otherwise, I would have had to put it off again, and I still have to do a true crime Q&A. Hopefully I can fix it by then. How do you know I'm not in a cathedral, Sarah? How do you know my podcasting studio isn't a giant cathedral? Riz says, I remember the protests here in Australia during 2020-2021 where the police were shooting rubber bullets at peaceful protesters at a shrine in Melbourne. Yeah, Australia's rough. Australia's rough. A lot of people point to Australia as evidence that some kind of gun confiscation or trade-in somehow would be a benefit. But we could look at some statistics. We could look at statistics from any country. I mean, most of them all say the same thing. More guns in Australia now than before the Port Arthur massacre. Firearm offenses hit a 10-year high. And yet there's still goofs out there that hallucinate that taking away guns from peaceful people so that way only the criminals can have soft targets is somehow a good idea. I mean, I can't figure it out. Riz, Port Arthur, don't get me started. I do have a podcast coming out on that. That's a rabbit hole for sure, for sure. Again, going back to Bill Cooper and his predictions about gun grabs and false flags and all of that. Obviously, I do not claim anything is true or untrue. This is MINDSHOCK, where the only thing we know for sure is that we don't know anything for sure. Alright, so that's it for now. This was a quick one. If I can fix the mic, I'll try to do the Q&A later tonight. Otherwise, I'll do it tomorrow. And then the Matt Walsh logical analysis on the moon landing video should be done in another 2 days. But I think everybody, it won't be disappointing. The new system is totally insane, but it's hopefully will get us better metrics. So that's it for now. Hopefully more people are able to have conversations like this where it won't be controversial to say that human rights are important and everybody has a right to live and defend themselves and their families and their dogs. Hope everybody found another edition of the MINDSHOCK podcast interesting and informative. You want to help support the podcast, help logic and reason return to a world where it is quickly going extinct. You can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. Hit that bell for notifications. If you're not getting them, just like and comment on more videos, or just go to youtube.com/MINDSHOCK. You could also become a YouTube member right here on YouTube. Help support the channel that way. Like and share Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. This is Bruce McGuire signing off. Catch you guys next time.